Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this AHDB's partners meeting. And we're going to explore the subject, why is everybody so interested in my farm data? Not my farm data, but my farm data collectively, if you see the point. My name's Mike Gooding. I'm Farming Systems Director at AHDB, and I have the double challenge as chair this morning. Firstly, to make data interesting, and to make data interesting at 8 o'clock in the morning. That really is quite a challenge. But fortunately, I am joined by a panel of deep thinkers, leaders in their fields, experts, who can bring their perspectives from their positions right the way across the supply chain. And that's what we want to try and do this morning. Firstly, the admin bits, tea, coffee, breakfast at the back. Nobody will be upset if you want to go and collect another coffee. Hannah's making her way through her bacon roll. There's no planned fire alarm, so if one goes off, that's the door. And what we will do is we will hear from our four speakers, who I'll introduce in turn, and then I'll open up to the floor for questions. And when it comes to questions, do try and keep them pithy and to the point. We'll fit in as many as we possibly can, and the trick is to try and catch my eye and wave at me frantically to show that you want to ask a question. My colleague Claire will bring round a microphone. It's really important that you speak into the microphone. I know we all think we have booming voices, but if you can speak into the microphone, because we are recording the session, and it will be good to actually hear your questions. The microphone will already be on. So the first person who goes, is it on? There's a £10 fine for the charities outside, and we'll use peer pressure to collect the money. So please keep your questions pithy and to the point. No speeches, Tom, when it comes to your turn. Okay, so to the matter at hand. Look, I think, I suspect at every Oxford Farming Conference for at least the last 20 years, there's either been a fringe meeting like this about data, speakers on the main stage. We've talked about big data, platforms claiming to relate to everything from yield, farm performance, farm benchmarking through to compliance standards and certification. It goes on, and indeed in yesterday's sessions there were a number of references to the importance of data. And from my own perspective, I think it's quite interesting that it now seems to be not something that's going to happen, it's actually essential to the future. What might have started as information that was sort of driving farm productivity demands for data pervade every corner of what we do in our farming businesses today. And many of us as farmers still have some reservations about that. Certainly the word trust was raised on a number of occasions yesterday in the discussions. And there are concerns over ownership and perhaps more importantly control of data. And fear of reprisals if you don't appear in the top 10%. So whether these concerns are genuine based on fact or not, one thing is for sure, there's only going to be more demands going forward. So the question is, how do we turn this demand from being sort of yet another task imposed on us that keeps me away from breaking the ice on water troughs or the other things that are important in my farming day job, to a tool that genuinely helps me as a farmer, one that is hassle-free and where the farmers have the confidence that the data that they are supplying isn't being used solely for others' commercial interests. So our four panellists, are going to address exactly this point. First, Sophie Gregory. Sophie's a first-generation dairy farmer running both organic and conventional systems, milking about 600 cows. She's passionate about connecting people to their food, growing people and their businesses, and that the right data is helping improve that business performance. You can't monitor what you don't measure. That mantra is one that Sophie believes passionately in. So Sophie, you're known to many of the audience for your social media presence and as a progressive dairy farmer. How do you see the use of data as a primary producer? Are the demands of others an opportunity to you or simply a headache?
I think a bit of both, Mike. I was thinking about this earlier, actually, when I was asked to do this panel, and thank you very much for including me. I thought, actually, we're just not like a data business. We're not very techy. And then I thought, actually, like the only text of the day I get, because we're all on WhatsApp now, is NML. And I use that probably the most important text I have in the whole year. All of our data around our milk collection that day, and that makes me make decisions for the rest of the day, the rest of the week on my farm. I think it's a bit of both. I think data I couldn't be without within our business, but when it becomes a duplication and I'm having to put the same data into other things twice in a slightly different format, that's when it gets frustrating and it takes me away from my day-to-day job.
As an organic farmer, of course, you choose to, you make the choice to take on the demands of increased data, part of the compliance. I farmed organically myself for a number of years and know exactly what the burden there is in doing that. In your own business, how do you manage those competing demands of your data, the day-to-day requirements with the needs for providing evidence?
I think, Mike, it's about making it part of regular routine for us. So when something happens, a health event happens, it's recorded straight away. We have a laptop that's we have a classroom on farm, it's also the staff room, it's also the office. We have a laptop that doesn't move from there, and when something happens, it gets entered. So you don't have that sort of a week before organic inspection, everyone's screaming because they haven't done the right thing. We've done the right things, but we haven't recorded it right. We try and make it part of day-to-day, and we also try and move the responsibility amongst the team. So someone's responsible for the vet and med, someone's responsible for the field records, so it doesn't become such a burden. But I think having it all in one place is something that we need to look at long-term. I'm getting pretty excited about something I think Adam is going to talk more about. Been involved in the farm data exchange that AHDB are working on, where they're trying to pull lots of different data together in one place, and I'm hoping long term it will sort of get rid of some of that duplication where I'm not sort of going through invoices looking for certain things. Things will be on there ready to go, and I can use it for compliance.
And I'm interested in that sort of fine management and multiple staff and different timings. Have you found that access to one set of data helpful in terms of managing things like your animal health, your feed rationing, whatever it is around the management of your cattle?
I think it really empowers our team to know that they've got access to all the data on farm. I'm pretty open about that within our team, because I think, we can link everything from, foot health, through to vet and med, through to, what that cow's eaten, all through down to their ear tag. And that anyone within our team can log onto our computer and have access to that, so they can see the problems. I do think that, especially having a young team, the next generation coming through are actually very interested in tech and interested in data, and I think we probably have to be open-minded that the job is not going to look quite the same going forward. And we've just put something called Cow Manager. Other brands are available, but it's for breeding cattle. It tells me when cows are on heat. We did that, actually. We were doing a very good job of breeding, getting cows in calf the normal way we were doing it with stickers, but actually we put it in for our team because we find that they are excited about that. They want to know that it also flags up health things, but they're excited about that. So I think we probably have to move with the times, and giving them access is just really important.
Well, that's a nice segue into Jonathan Statham as the vet. So Jonathan combines 30 years, yes, it's almost planned this. Jonathan combines 30 years in practice as a farm vet in North Yorkshire, with a range of wide representatives roles. He's past president of the British Cattle Veterinary Association, chair of Bishopton Veterinary Group, fiercely independent since 1943, it says here, chief executive at agri-tech biotech company RAFT Solutions, Professor of Sustainable Livestock Health and Welfare at Harper and Keele Vet School, and in his spare time he chairs the Animal Health and Welfare Board England. Jonathan, look, you're here wearing multiple hats, and you are allowed to swap them around in your comments, but can we stick to the practicing vet bit and some of the points that Sophie mentioned. You know, vets as policy, as advisors on the farm are in a highly trusted position. How do you see and how does your profession, your veterinary profession, cope with the demands for data?
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for the invitation and the bacon sarnie. Well, that was excellent. So I think, you know, as a vet, you know, first of all, I take an oath in terms of the health and welfare of kind of animals that are kind of, you know, under my care, and that's an important part of what goes on. But as a farm vet, I'm also massively committed to sustainable production of food. And I think that's about doing that sustainably for the farm economics, for the environment, you know, for all the wider issues that we've got involved here. And I hope that as well as carving cows and doing the kind of fire brigade part of the job, that I've got a role as a trusted advisor and as a trusted part of that farm team. And Mike talked about trust, obviously, in the introduction. I think the role of a vet, the long-term relationship about knowing the farm, knowing the individual circumstances of that herd, the people that are there, the farming community in that area, their contracts that they work, you know, towards, is really important. So I see a really important role in being able to provide trusted advice, and therefore hopefully it's evidence-based advice as well. And so the need for good data to combine with my knowledge of the farm, the things that I see every day, the things that I touch and smell, but to go to the farm armed with information that is actually relevant is key too. And maybe those two words are an important point here, the difference between data and information. Because I used to assume, you know, certainly 20 years ago, I very much saw that the answer was more data. We had a lack of data. I had a lack of data about the farms that I was going to, and I had a mission to gather more data. But now as I fill my phone with data, as my laptop starts working with data, as we sink data centers below the oceans, because of the amount of heat they're generating. We consume more energy than a small country to fuel quantity of data. And what I really am focused on is quality of information. And how do we actually combine huge volumes of data into something that's useful to farmers who are incredibly short of time, incredibly pressured, and therefore just need to filter. And I think I've got a role as a vet, Mike, hopefully to be acting for the farmer. I haven't got a conflict of interest. I'm acting for my farm client as a professional. And therefore, as long as we can make sure that we don't ignore the welfare and health of the animals that are there, but actually I'm there to provide advice on that basis. And so I think, how do we get quality? How do we filter so that we're not just having all the data? I can now, you know, work a lot with sensors and technology. We can produce millions of lines of data every 10 minutes. But what's useful? So I think this is a really important point, is that, and I think useful is about, first of all, filtering, prioritising what's information that the farm needs at the moment to make the best decisions, the best economic decisions. That's both for the long term, but also for what's kind of going on in the current circumstances that change. Well, the second thing is the trust bit, is that how are we authenticating the information that we use today? How is a farm authenticating the information that comes to them? What do we believe? What's being manipulated? What's basically the source of that information? So I see my role as a farm vet is hopefully delivering, you know, better health and welfare on the farm and improving the bottom line for the farm as well, sustainably, and producing food with the smallest impact on the environment that we can as well. All of those things around efficiency and good practice, but also about being there to provide trusted advice, to say, the source of this data is something that we know where it comes from, provenance is good, and we're going to take those streams of data that we trust, and we're going to add value to it by combining it with my knowledge of the farm, my knowledge of the industry, and putting those things together. So I think that would be the thing. It's a trusted advisor using trusted sources of information and adding value to it.
And certainly in yesterday's presentation, context was made on a number of occasions. And I think as we take a more precision approach across all of our agriculture, whether it's livestock or arable farming, being able to put that in the context of that individual farm situation can only help make better decisions. Maybe you like to think about exciting the audience with some of the new technologies that you know ahead. But whilst we've got you, Jonathan, look, you do have a role as chair of the Animal Health and Welfare Board England for DEFRA, and last year's National Audit Office report was on the country's preparedness for disease outbreak was pretty scathing, and I know it's quite a focal point for the DEFRA team. So alongside reporting on issues like, medicine use and those sorts of things, data are obviously critical to protecting our trading arrangements, ensuring that we have access to our export markets. So as chair of that board, what's DEFRA doing about elevating the position that data plays?
Thanks, Mike. I thought this one might be coming. Again, this is a change of hats moment, so I want to emphasise the fact that as a farm vet in practice, I do feel I see both sides of this in terms of where data goes and basically understanding the consequences of that. Data is essential for making decisions at lots of levels, whether it's developing policy, whether it's in trade negotiations, but also managing an exotic disease outbreak. I was in practice in 2001. In terms of government responsibilities, it's kind of helpful to know where all the animals are when you've got a disease outbreak that's spreading like wildfire through the country. And we didn't. And at times we still don't. And therefore there's a real need to have the information to be able to manage things like that effectively. If we don't know where animals are from a government perspective, it's very difficult, first of all, to model what might happen, but also is to react quickly and try and control, make decisions in those early hours, let alone days of an outbreak situation, that can make all the difference. So I think there's a need, first of all, in some really, massive consequences of managing big disease outbreaks, and that's something, as our Health and Welfare Board, that we're involved in policy development on that. But we're also, there's important need in terms of trade negotiations. I'm massively proud of our farming industry, and I stand on lots of platforms around the world and talk about our globally leading animal welfare standards. The challenge we get back sometimes is that's great, so now prove it. Now prove it. Prove it in a way that you're going to be able to win in a trade negotiation with some fairly adept, industries around the world. And we don't always have as much evidence as we need. A body that can share this between kind of farming industry and government is really important. And I'm pleased to be part of these discussions today because AHDB has a really important role in terms of information we might not want to always share with government, but government needs to have access to some of these things to manage the consequences of big disease risks, to deliver trade negotiations, but also for farming to have a business case for Treasury. If we're going to bid for money, if we're going to ask for money to eradicate disease, to basically support sustainable food, Treasury says, so what's my return on investment going to be? What's the current position? What's going to happen when we invest that money? If we can't provide information to produce a business case, it's very difficult to basically get money.
Jonathan, thank you very much. So look, if government is one of the farmer concerns about, where that data goes, we move on to Joe in the retail sector. I won't say pantomime villain Joe, it's a bit harsh to say that, but look, Joe heads up Sustainable Sourcing and Agriculture at ASDA, and we're very grateful, Joe, for you coming down to join us today. He's responsible for standards and initiatives that impact on hundreds of producers throughout the UK. He spent 15 years working in the food sector with Morrison's and ASDA, focusing on commercial and environmental sustainability. Joe, you are right at the heart of the retail world. Your life must be dominated by data. What's the greatest challenge for you in the retail sector, and what helps you to sort of thrive in a hugely competitive commercial area?
Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. I just wanted to quickly provide a little bit of context, I suppose, which is, the whole of the retail sector recognise that farm data, agricultural data, and the importance and the role of agriculture in all of our broader environmental and welfare challenges is really critical. So it's not just an ASDA thing, and there are lots of collaborative collective forums working with organisations like IGD and RAFT to try to tackle the issues around agriculture data and farm data. And why? Because it plays such an important role in the footprint and the impact of production of our products. So if you take ASDA or any retailer as a business, around about 2% of the impact of the business is its actual operations, but 98% of the emissions and the associated environmental impact sits in the supply chain. And broadly speaking, about half of that is all of the energy getting used and the logistics of products, but around half of it is the agricultural production of the products. So it plays a really, really important role. But conversely, we don't fully understand, and the rules and the methodologies and the way we use data, this is all something which is in development. So we're trying to wrestle with this big challenge around how do we correctly use data, how do we correctly ladder it up, which bits of it are really important. And we kind of need the data to work with to understand and to break down the challenges of the ways that we're actually going to work with it. And I would say conversely, pantomime villain, not looking for sympathy. We all have these challenges around reporting data. We've got obligations to government, to NGOs, to banks, and that's some of the reason the requests for data come down. Conversely, so did the processors, and inevitably so did some of the farmers. So can kind of share that pain to a certain extent. But I just wanted to touch quickly upon a couple of points, which one of them is, why is it important? Now, there's so many different reasons, but one of them I wanted to pull out a little bit from Jack Bobo's kind of like opening introduction to the session was rhetoric. And what we have is a pretty reasonable understanding around the emissions associated with the impact of food production. What we have a really poor understanding of is the total system impact of food production. It's an organic system with a flux and a cycle of emissions that happen within it. And at the moment, we've got a very strong narrative around reducing emissions, which isn't particularly sexy, appealing, because it just means less. And that's great from a waste or be efficient perspective, but it's not great for a future of industry perspective. And actually, there's a really important role, I think, in sharing data which helps us understand the cycle and nature of impact, the role of things like carbon stocks and land management in practice, which can actually help us change a narrative and tell a more positive story and narrative about the role of agriculture. So I think it's really important to think about that broader context of why sharing data is important. It's important to changing that narrative a little bit and telling the full story around the impact of system. And I was quickly just going to touch upon two other points. One of them was, I suppose, understanding a little bit what retail actually see and maybe demystifying some of the elements of farm data. It's like, I share my farm data. It's like, what's a retailer going to do about this? Are they going to walk away? And quite honestly, I don't see an individual farm's data. Unless I'm on your farm having a conversation with you and you're sharing it with me, I won't see it. And the thing that we're wrestling with is we're trying to turn that individual, well, the process will be turning an individual farm's data, aggregating it up into what's the impact of beef production, what's the impact of dairy production. And the challenge the retailer's doing is they're trying to turn that from, that's the impact of that one piece of production. What's the impact of the 25,000, 50,000, you know, whatever the range and scale of the retailers, the impact of all those products being produced. So we're taking some of that source data, trying to translate it up, and we're dealing with high levels of aggregation quite often.
Joe, just to press you on that point, this is my last grumpy farmer question, okay? You know, that issue of trust, it is, as I said earlier, it came up a lot yesterday in the conversations. You know, so what can you say to producers who perhaps are reticent about their data being used in what they see, frankly, as an uneven supply chain? What can you say as the retailer to reassure that negativity?
Yeah. I think if a farmer has that particular sentiment or a producer has that particular sentiment, I'd say get part of or inquire about, whether it's through your processors or directly with the retailer, you know, what are the opportunities to engage in some of those producer groups and those aligned groups to understand and actually have the conversation directly, because they exist. We have those within our supply chain across different sectors, and there's the opportunity to have the conversation and to understand the dynamics within the supply chain. And the other bit would be, if I take dairy, beef, lamb kind of sectors, we've got relationships with each of our processors which are long-standing over 20 years. And it's like these are long-term relationships, and there's no ask or push which is coming without context and without support. And if you're not feeling that, then something's gone wrong in the supply chain. So the way it's setting out is this is something, you know, these are suppliers, processors, producers we've been working with for a long time, and it should be a two-way conversation. There's nothing within that I don't think would feel comfortable talking about, really.
Joe, thank you. That's really insightful, and you know, I'm very grateful that you've come along to put that retail perspective on it. So look, we've heard from the farmer, we've heard from the farm vet, we've heard from the retailer. So let's now turn to the to Adam. Adam Short. It says here, Adam is Data Programs Associate Director at AHDB. He's been involved in IT and data systems delivery for 20 years across a huge range of organisations, including the Home Office, the Ministry of Defence and IBM. He's also run his own agri-software startup company, focused on genetics and livestock breeding. He also runs a small-scale livestock farm down in Devon. So, Adam, we've heard about the importance of data. We've heard about the reliance of data for and information and the reputational protection around trade. And the need for reporting to ensure we have access to markets. So this is your chance to explain the AHD position. What is it that AHDB is doing, and why does the future require perhaps a different approach to where we've been over the last few years? What do you do, Adam?
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to start by saying the number of bosses I've got in this room is terrifying. So I best get this bit right, hadn't I? So I'm going to try and condense 2 years' worth of work, I think, and thinking into less than 5 minutes, which is going to be tricky. I will miss something. AHDB has been involved in data for decades, as you will no doubt know, and many of you in this room will have used the data that we work with. But it's fair to say, in the last 2 years, we've been focusing specifically on this area of data sharing across the industry, and where there are particular pinch points, which use cases they apply to. And we've heard a bunch of them come up already on the panel. What's really reassuring from my point of view is everything that's been said today echoes everything we've heard consistently over the last 2 years, and trust being one of those big areas. So over those 2 years, we've done a lot of stakeholder engagement, as you would expect from AHDB. It was really interesting that it didn't matter whether we were talking to a farmer or a processor or a bank, they all cited that trust of that end user, the person who's providing the data, is the major barrier to data sharing in their eyes. But as part of that stakeholder engagement, there was sort of 3 or 4 common themes, trust being one of them. There was some stuff around carbon calculation, harmonization, things like that, stuff that AHDB perhaps doesn't have a direct role in, but we work closely with DEFRA on conveying farmer levy payer thoughts in that area. But the 2 areas where we thought AHDB could have a role were the inconsistent, uncoordinated nature of data requests that farmers, processors, retailers, everybody is feeling, and that trust component. And the nice little triumvirate that kept coming up around that was trust, transparency, and control. And Mike, you mentioned control earlier on in your opener. We developed those ideas, and we eventually formulated a proof of concept. That might be techie jargon, I'm not sure, but a little pilot, a small project that we call the Farm Data Exchange. It used to be called Data Custodian, if anybody saw the early press release. Same thing. What it is, if you want the techie jargon, a decentralized data system. But leaving that aside...
Please try and move on from the tech.
I have to get some in. Really, it is plumbing and permissions. And I am sadly quite passionate about plumbing in the techie world. We think one of the areas where there is a gap is the ability to share the data that already exists. There was a lot of discussion of this. It was in Louise Manning's report. It came up in Farmers Weekly Question Time. Came up in the Red Tractor session last night as well. So being able to connect those disparate data systems that hold data that already exists is the plumbing element. That's the decentralized element. The permissions bit is making sure that farmers, we would say levy payers, because there are more people involved than just farmers, but farmers have control over their data sharing. Mike, you touched on at the beginning the nuance between ownership and control, and that's something we've had to dig into as well. People do use the terms interchangeably, and it is tricky. From a GDPR perspective, if we're talking about your name, your national insurance number, your address, you own that data. GDPR says that's great. Your cow's tag number, do you own that data? Does the tag company own that data? That starts to get really tricky, and that's just a trivial example. But that is data about your farming business. You absolutely have a right to control that data. And it becomes much easier to talk about control. There's some case law in this area, which I won't get into, but we're moving to a position where databases can be owned, but data can and should be controlled. So that's a slight nuance. So the Farm Data Exchange proof of concept it's almost complete. In fact, we've got 18 farmers that we're working with who are hands-on with the system, including Sophie. And we're working with beef and dairy processors around some of the output data from farms. We're working with BCMS via the RPA, with feed companies, and with carbon calculators. It's fair to say that we focused with the proof of concept on a specific use case, a specific problem area, which is the challenge of environmental reporting, because that was one of the areas where there was the biggest challenge, basically. That seems an obvious place to dig into, but the solution applies to all of the challenges in this area.
So you see this actually, the proof of concept is the pilot project, mainly around that environmental data. You see that expanding into potentially lots of other areas.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, people will know we already do a lot of work with veterinary data, for example. So evidencing responsible antibiotic usage. It is exactly the same problem. The data does exist in separate places. I mean, in theory, in vet practice management systems, that's a whole other hornet's nest. We won't get into that. There is no need to be sending consultants down the farm driveway to ask the farmer questions about that stuff. The farmer absolutely needs to permission whether that data can be accessed. That's fundamental. But taking some of that burden of the data gathering away from farmers seems obvious, and a lot of the cost to the industry. Any one of the processors, feed manufacturers, fertilizer suppliers that we talk to will bend your ear about how much wasted, in their eyes, business time is going into trying to find and provide this data.
I think, Louise, in your report yesterday, it's one of the, I still haven't got my hard copy, by the way, that you highlighted the enter data once and then take the hassle out of it moving forward. Adam,
Can I just say that comes from Australia, and with the beef sustainability framework and the sheep sustainability framework, that is a key element of it. There isn't farm assurance and everything else. You just ask for the data once, and then you have permissioning.
Adam, bearing in mind who is in the room here, do you want to put some thoughts around timelines?
Carefully, yes. The proof of concept will complete mid-February, so we're very, very close to that. It is built. We're just, we're running through the last bits of user testing with the farmers. They've been iterating through different elements of the user interface, all that good stuff. We'll then be into, writing the reports that come out the back of that, putting some recommendations to our governance forums, and we have a few of those at AHDB, and then seeing what we do next. It's very important from AHDB's perspective that we've got a temperature check from the industry to see whether what we've come up with is needed, is useful, and what AHDB's role in that should be in the future. But my hope is, if the signals are good, then by the time we get to the middle of this year, we are talking about something that is productionized rather than just a small proof of concepts.
Adam, that's really, really helpful. Thanks for talking about that. We're dealing with plumbing rather than ownership and control. That for me has been the easiest way to visualise the difference between perhaps some of the things that we've seen in the industry over the last 10 years or so into what the future might actually look like. Right, this is your chance to ask questions, and the hands are whizzing up already. My colleague Claire is going to come whizzing around the room with a microphone. Pithy questions, not statements, and we'll put the panellists on the spot.
I just wonder how easy it's going to be to get hold of a plumber in this circumstances. I'm Ken Rundle. I operate in Scotland, a semi-retired agricultural journalist. I was interested in what Jonathan Statham was saying, and in fact Mike Gooding's just referred to something as well. And that is, I don't know you, Jonathan, at all, but you come across as if you like, a conventional vet, traditional vet, but we know that the vet practices, the way that they are being managed across the country is completely different now. They're being run by companies with a very commercial focus, keen to monetize everything. You talked a lot there about trust and the relationship between the vet and client. We know within the States there's a very different relationship where basically the vet is hired by the farmer, and unless the vet follows the farmer's wishes, they're sacked. Now, I just wonder how we can depend on trust, the kind of trust you were talking about, and I think you explained very well the value that gives to the farmer, and what we might see in the future as a more commercial approach in veterinary practices comes in.
I think that's yours, Jonathan.
I think I'll take. Well, thanks for the question. First of all, I mean, a note of optimism. It's early in the day. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, nothing stays the same. My first job was kind of, was kind of literally James Herriot's practice, and and I work as a vet in the Dales. You're absolutely right. I hopefully do come across as being, I will have my wellies on the farm this afternoon, weather permitting, but actually things change. But also there's some things that are consistent. Actually I've got quite a lot of faith in the individual kind of vets. And what we've got going on here is still the theme of people that want to be vets, farm vets in particular. They do have an individual responsibility as professionals. They've got a role, they've got basically membership of a Royal College in this country, which means that they have got responsibilities to do those things for the benefit of animals and for their farm clients, and to balance them up. And yes, there are tensions in that. Now, you talk about the kind of corporate elements of the industry, and I want to again be really clear that there are both excellent and high integrity levels throughout all parts of the veterinary profession, and there are also obviously challenges. There's actually a swing back towards independent ownership, by the way, is one of the interesting factors, particularly in the farm side, that's worth noting. But I don't see those things as being mutually exclusive. I think the integrity of the vets are acting for farmers is really important, of the animals under their care. There are also potentially opportunities to change the way that practices are regulated in terms of individual vets, and thoughts about how we might change the way legislation works to hold businesses accountable in the same way that we hold individual vets accountable might be one interesting opportunity to answer some of your questions as well.
Joe, perhaps if we think about something like antibiotic use, for example, and how we can then perhaps gather that data at a veterinary level, and from your, if you like, corporate and social responsibility point of view, the point that Ken makes about can we trust the veterinary profession? I'm slightly paraphrasing this, and I know that antibiotics come in from across the water, and they're not all recorded. How important is that to you from your sort of brand and corporate awareness?
Yeah, so it is important. There's an organisation called Alliance for Save Our Antibiotics. They're an organisation that have long engaged really with the retail processing sector around public disclosure, transparency, around responsible management of antibiotics. So we've got an expectation to undertake public reporting and disclosure, but we're also sensitive around that topic around trust and visibility of individual farm data. So through organisations like RUMA, we essentially collectively get together to manage the inflows of data, the aggregate level of reporting, so that we're not exposing individual farms in the process. But we have to ladder up elements of essentially responsible policy management and the onward sharing of information, so that we can provide, trust, transparency, confidence on the action the industry is taking. And it is taking action. It has taken action, delivered progress, and I think that's delivered. It doesn't mean challenge goes away from elements of civil society, but it's an area where progress has been driven because there's been a lot of attention and scrutiny around it, really. So, yeah.
I do suspect that those pinch points around things like not just antibiotics, but also things like wormer use and anthelmintics, their effect on the environment, it's only going to come more and more in focus, and particularly as perhaps we get more into a One Health type agenda. Hold the thought for a minute, Jonathan. Julian?
Thanks, Mike. Julian Gairdner. I've got an independent consultancy, but one of the things we do is run the Farm Data Principles governance scheme for data, and we're very much aligned with what Adam's been doing with the pilot. And I would encourage farmers in the room to encourage their data handlers to sign up to the scheme, because it is all about putting in the sort of public domain the way in which data handlers handle farmers' data and to ensure there is trust and transparency around how that's done. So plug over.
I was going to say, nice advert, Julian. And the question is...
The question is, going back to what the Secretary of State said yesterday about the new SFI scheme and the fact that they're planning that and they're going to roll that out in the summer and in the autumn. What does the panel feel SFI could offer in terms of encouraging farmers to collect and manage good data? Because I think it's been a big missed opportunity in this sort of post-Brexit world that we haven't used some of the ex-cap money to incentivise farmers to actually have the right technology and the right methodologies for collecting data, collecting and connecting data. And it seems to me there's an opportunity through the revised SFI to do something in that space. And I'm interested in what the panel think of that.
So, Sophie, are you hanging out for SFI?
We were talking about this earlier, actually, around how, subsidies have propped rents, etc. It's a big... Some of us have been waiting for this announcement for a while. I think, like you said, there was a missed opportunity in terms of, we've done the actions on farm, but where's the data to go with it? No one's really reported it back. We've got the soil samples, but where is all that data? We've been paid the money. Really, it was, that baseline probably should have been taken. I think it is an opportunity, but how many farmers are eligible under the first round? It counts a lot of dairy out. It's a very small amount of land in terms of dairy. It's great. It will cover a lot of upland, some smaller farms, but I think, what will be left when it gets to the next stage, they have said it's one pot of money. So we'll see. Very much holding out for the round two. We are still in a scheme, but we won't be the year after. So I think, a missed opportunity in terms of data because we did the actions, but where is the data to go with it? And the government could have utilised that.
Jonathan, do you want to... Which hat are you wearing?
Can I wear both at the same time? Is that allowed? So, slightly both. So I think it's a really important question, isn't it? Because there are opportunities to basically to fill some of the gaps that we've got in terms of... So I'm going to pick an obvious example, which is animal health and welfare pathway. Because although it's a kind of parallel to some degree to the recent announcements, it probably answers the previous question a bit as well, because the vets have got a key role in the animal health and welfare pathway in actually collecting data. And they've got a key role because they're trusted individuals and they sign those things off as individuals with integrity. So there is a role for collecting data, but also it's important in relationship with the farmer because there's only a small amount of data that is currently being shared with government because a lot of it is funded opportunities for the vet and the farmer to collect data to use for the benefit of the farm. So can we find a way to use some of that extra information more widely? It's about trust.
Joe, you want to make a quick comment?
Yeah, I suppose specifically around SFI, if we're thinking about public subsidy, public funding going into delivering land management practice, which is driving environmental improvement, then that's a whole range of progress that's being delivered within the supply chain. And if the data doesn't flow through, we don't have visibility of it. And at the moment, the data doesn't flow through and we're not getting visibility, so it's not accounted for. And I think this feeds back to a whole range of principles like baselining, the role of public and private sector roles in how we aggregate data. There's very clearly, in my opinion, a role for the public sector in managing that type of data and navigating some of that conflict between, okay, there's a financial element of this because it's impacting subsidy, and how do we make sure that that visibility is not flowing onwards, downwards through the supply chain, but the environmental benefit and impact of the action being delivered is, so that we can account for that in our figures, the government can account for it in nationally determined contributions around climate change, and then conversely, the bit around emissions is where the private sector steps in and actually grasps that and manages the scaling of that within the supply chain. So we've got the land management piece in the public sector and then the emissions within the private sector, and we need those worlds to come together and flow through data systems.
We'll hold that thought, Adam. We've got another question here, and then I want to come to my colleague, Chris.
Thank you. Diana Overton, Frontier Agriculture. We sit in the supply chain between the farmers and largely the food, drink and feed processors, and then quite often there's further steps before getting to the retailers. I'm sort of directing this particularly at Joe. One of the issues that we have a recurring theme on from our farmers is the breadth of requests for data that are coming down the supply chain from the different food, drink, feed processors and then beyond. Is there an opportunity for the retailers to do more work together about perhaps a more consistent set of priorities. So you're right, we've got to move on from just the carbon reporting, but if we could have a consistent set of priorities, I think that would both help farmers to really understand, right, what should we work on first? I think it would build trust. And I also think it might help us to sort of unblock some of these issues in terms of getting the data along the supply chain. But I'd be interested in your thoughts.
The simplest answer is absolutely yes, there is. I think some of those conversations are happening. I think the other slight challenge in the background is this broader concept around rules and accounting frameworks being delivered by the academic society or the elements of research. And stuff is changing and stuff is happening. So within DEFRA, there is work underway at the moment which industry is engaging with around what do standardised set of carbon accounting rules look like for farms. And we've got to resolve some of that, and that's in process. So it's happening. It's not moving as fast as anyone wants, but yeah, I think we've got the right forums for those. And if there's suggestions, recommendations, feedback, I'd say reach out, because we can put any individuals who've got feedback into, share that in the right forums, really.
Baselining, perfect segue. Chris Goodrum. Chris, could you give us an update on the baselining project?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, yeah, Chris Goodrum, I'm the Environment Director at AHDB. So after the last kind of 15 months, we've been running an environmental baselining pilot on 170 farms, predominantly because we saw a gap in the data, particularly around measuring the net zero position of those farms, but also the carbon stocks on those farms. So most of that data is now being captured. We're in the data analysis phase. We are looking to publish some initial observations at the end of this month. We are also out with the farmers gathering more information around the farming practices to enhance the database so that we'll be able to not only say what the carbon stocks are in a field, we'll be able to compare arable with grassland, we'll be able to compare ryegrass with multi-species swards, and different practices that have happened. So without giving anything away, because I know there's some comms colleagues in the room that will slap me if I kind of start talking about some of the results. The one thing I would say is a bit of an eye-opener. Those 170 farms are amongst them managing millions of tons of carbon stocks on those farms. And at the moment, there's no consistent way for us to measure that across the 4 nations. There's no incentive for them to manage that stock, and there's no incentive for them to increase that stock, which, given the importance of that, I find very odd.
Without giving anything away, as you say, Chris, are you surprised actually about the breadth of the range between the different farms and the different farming systems? Yes. I mean, particularly if you start looking at the carbon stocks, the vast majority of those carbon stocks is in the soil. Yeah. There's a huge range of stocks we're seeing in the soil, from 50 tonnes per hectare up to 650 tonnes per hectare. Now, some of that's to do with the texture of the soil. There are limitations, obviously, in what you can do, but some of that's to do with practices as well. Okay, everybody's starting to shuffle. Final question down here. I'll do the introduction. Tom Allen Stevens, you all know him well, so you don't need to do that bit, Tom.
Thank you very much. Yeah, though I'm a local farmer, I also lead the British On-Farm Innovation Network. My question is about reward for the data. I mean, as a farmer myself, I find I'm paying an increasing cost to gather this data. And just to give you an example, I've got a battle with Class at the moment who want a 4-figure sum to release my yield data, which I'm really offended by, actually. So the cost of gathering this data, doing carbon calculators, soil sampling, gathering it all together into something that is meaningful is a real cost to the farmer. Why the hell should I then release that for free to someone who wants my data? So what is the reward? What is the structure to actually reward people if they're going to reveal their data?
Thank you, Tom, the other grumpy farmer from Oxfordshire. Who would like to take that one? Joe, one quick comment from everybody would be great.
Yeah, so I think reward comes from delivering improvement and action, really. And there are rules that need to be understood within the supply chain around how you creditize an improvement and how you can sell that improvement. So having an inventory empowers you to then evidence and deliver progress on that by taking an action. The other thing is money and finance will not just flow from improvement being delivered, but actually data can help us understand where particular risks are or resilience benefits might be delivered within the supply chain to unlock investment down the supply chain and taking action to deliver progress. So there's actually two aspects I see financing working. One's delivering improvement and one's to manage risk and resilience, and we actually need data to flow to be able to do the latter.
Adam, can you make Tom happy?
Feels unlikely. Yeah, you're quite right. And value has been central in everything we've been looking at with the farm data exchange principle. I find it quite unhelpful sometimes how much rhetoric can build up around, when we ask a farmer for their data, they should be given a tenner, of hard cash. Like that. That is not where the value is in this piece. But the value is already evident. If you go to a high street retail bank now and you can evidence your sustainable farming practices in a way that reduces their PCAF scores, they will give you a preferential loan rate. It's the same across insurance, it's the same across the processes. I think we've got a lot to do if we were to put something like Farm Data Exchange in place to make sure that value is released, that value is available to farmers, because there is a lot of cost in that piece, as you mentioned, that I think could be released with a mechanism like Farm Data Exchange, and it's important that is realised by the farmers. But I think that is where the value is. I don't think it's in this sort of notion of hard cash for data requests.
Jonathan, 10 seconds, then Sophie.
Yeah, really quickly. So the first thing is I passionately agree that basically, sharing the data means sharing the rewards for what comes back from that. I'm going to just pick the kind of example around disease outbreak, for example, and eradication of disease. There are benefits with everybody getting rid of disease, for example, in an area. And in the same way, there's real opportunities making that business case for basically government funding as well. That's a deal.
Sophie, one quick comment, and then we'll hear from Louise, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think probably the dairy sector's quite in front with this. We've probably had the pressure to be quite front of this, but some of my milk price is made up of a return from my data being given to my processor as part. I'm an ALA supplier. It's a co-op. Probably I'm very lucky. I know I'm very lucky. But we get a return for our data, for our sustainability incentive model. It's called Farm Ahead. But I think we've been quite far in front because we've been under so much pressure from externals to do this. So I do feel lucky, but I can understand the frustration of being asked to even pay for it. It seems unfair when we're doing it in the first place.
Yeah, but I'm going to be very quick. So when I was researching the report, I spoke to somebody in Switzerland, and with the deforestation and small-scale farmers, every time a farmer's data is accessed, they're paid by Bitcoin. It's simple. That ought to be applied for all farmers in the UK.
Oh, blimey, there's a thought. Look, thanks very much. We're up against time, and I know you need to get upstairs if you want to get in. So it simply remains me to say thank you to our four panellists. Thank you to my colleagues Claire and Christian for doing all the hard work and pulling everything together today. And thank you very much for your questions and your contributions. I'm sorry we missed a couple of questions at the back, but enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.